Welcome to Mike's V8 Garage, and now I'm going to introduce my next project car. Not that one. That one. So this is a rather scabby, down at heel Lexus IS 250 SEL, which I got from a Copart salvage auction as a non-runner at 183,000 miles with an engine fault for the princely sum of £900, plus a little bit on top for delivery fees and all the rest of it. But basically just over £1,000 got me this. And the thinking is I can get dug into the engine fault, I can do engines. Potentially it's something simple, potentially not, but there's enough of a margin which, with slightly doggy examples of these going for about £2,500 and decent ones going for about 4, 5 or 6, there's enough of a margin there that if I do all the work myself I shouldn't lose anything and may actually make a bit. But looking around the car itself, it is pretty scabby. It was sold as a non-runner with minor cosmetic damage, which pretty much matches the description. Front bumper and bonnet, which had a little dent which I've pulled out, but we are going to have to replace that bonnet to do it properly. But lots of stone chips, lots of marks commensurate with the age, and overall very dirty and scabby. The alloys are absolutely honking and they're just going to have to be refurbished with new tyres. No surprises there. And I've got new tyres sat in the back already for the front, and I'm going to be busy sourcing them for the rear as well. But that's going to be one of the first things I do, is get these tyres done. Moving on down the side, bits of missing trim, further stone chips, and just general marks of use and a little bit of neglect. Slightly less scabby alloy, but still needing refurbed, because as you can see all the paint is bubbling and peeling, a known Lexus fault with alloys, so really all four are going to have to be done. Around the back, the rear bumper is okay at the back, but around the side is one of those bits of cosmetic damage that was mentioned, where it's been popped out of its mounting clips. Now there is actual damage in there as well to the bumper, but I'm going to see whether or not I can bring that one back and get it clipped in. If not, a new bumper's on the cards as well, which for the IS 250, because it's got the dual exhaust cutout, will be a little bit more challenging to find, unfortunately. Semi-decent alloy, but tyres gone, and that's after it's been inflated, it's gone back down again, so I need tyres in the rear as well as the front. Same thing down this side, just generally scabby paintwork, a little bit of neglect, but 90% of this will polish up and it'll come back quite nicely. And then on this side we've got a scabby alloy and one of the undisclosed bits, which was a completely broken tie rod. And if you look at the auction photos of this car, you'll see this wheel is always pointed at a slightly different angle to the rest of the car. I didn't pick up on that, I should have, but that's mainly because the tie rod itself was snapped and everything was just dangling free. So I've got the tie rod in the end off already, and I've got a new one that'll be fitting at some point in time. But that's not desperate urgent because it's not exactly going anywhere just now. Inside, beige leather interior. Beyond the dirt and the crud and the muck and the damp, only a bit of that, it's actually in really good condition, and I think it'll come back really well with a bit of concentrated cleaning and a little bit of attention to detail. The headliner is all attached and fine. The carpets are all in good condition. There's no real issues inside, apart from, as I said, it's just really, really grubby and needs a good clean. Same thing in the rear. 2 new front tyres ready to go on. Well, 2 used front tyres. All pretty good. A little bit tight in the back, but then this is the smaller little brother to that thing's big brother. I'm not going to open the boot just now because there's all sorts of nastiness in there, because I've been working on this for a few days now. But overall, as you look at it, it's a car that's worth the effort to save, I think anyway. So that's my intention. See what the problem is, see what I can do about it, and then get this thing back to looking like a decent car, which I think it deserves. So, sat back inside now, and I must say these seats are really comfortable actually. I'm quite surprised. More so than the GS, interestingly, even though it was meant to be the more luxurious one. But anyway, I digress. Moving inside the car, as I said, I got this as a non-runner. So the battery was completely dead, the tyres were flat, the key fob battery was dead. It had been sat for a long time. You can see that from the alloys and the condition outside. There was also a nice bit of mould starting in the boot, which I'm in the middle of tackling now because I don't want to let that take a hold. So all the boot mats, fabrics and all the rest of it are currently in my room. They've been gone over with a chemical formula and are busy drying out now, and I'm going to clean the rest of the boot this evening, and then that'll be nice and clean and ready to receive all the bits I strip off the car. But the first priority was to get firstly the tyres inflated so I could move it around a bit more easily, but also to get the battery charged up because it was absolutely dead. So the first thing I did though was get the GS alongside and just get it with a little portable inflator pump I've got, was to get the tyres pumped up. So one of the first things I need to do while the tyres are getting pumped up is change the fob battery, because both it and the car's battery are completely dead. Pretty simple. Just need to get the little key out of the recess there, insert it into the little groove you can see there, which I need both hands to do. And once you've popped it apart, you've met with something like that. It's a CR1632 battery that these go into. I've got a new one waiting there. Replace battery and the fob's all back together and hopefully working. If not, should be able to recode it quite easily. And with that, all four tyres are now inflated. Whether they hold air or not's another thing, but next job is to get that battery onto the recharger. So initially I thought this battery was dead because it was only reading about 6.25 volts. However, rather than just go out and spend £100 on a new battery, I've got its big brothers out there. Cables connected positive to positive, negative to negative, and that's allowed the charger to actually start pulling a voltage into that thing. And there's a good 14 volts across the terminals there. So basically that battery is transferring a good load into that battery. I'm going to leave them for an hour or so, and hopefully I can get that battery back on charge itself. And as a final update on the battery saga, left this one on charge, piggybacked for about an hour or so, and then tested it with the voltmeter, and it's back up at 11 volts, and it's now happily taken a charge from the reconditioner. So hopefully this will come all the way back. So that was a bit of a result, getting the battery recovered, and it's definitely a useful trick to sort of piggyback, connect it in series with another one. And that battery now, to look back, has been in for over a week and the car still powers up fine. There's no issues there. So that battery has properly come back as far as I can tell. So that's about £100 saved, which is good. But at the time, roll back to a week ago, I got that battery in, got the car ready to start up, and it took a little while once it was given power for everything to kind of normalise and all the ECUs to reset and so on. But after that, I was able to get the dash powering up, all good. And everything seemed to be working okay. It went through a check, but I didn't have the VSC fault at the time because obviously the battery had been dead, so all the codes had been cleared. But I did go around and check everything, and all of the electric stuff actually works. The radio initially had a bit of an issue, but that was primarily the battery being at half charge. Once I got the battery fully charged, everything is working fine. The only thing not working is back there, which with the SEL class, or spec rather, you've got a rear sunshade, got a button down here. I can hear a click, but nothing happens. So the motor to that's gone, and that is literally the only electrical fault I've found so far. Everything else works, because Lexus. So what I then did was look at getting the engine running. So now we move on to the fun bit, the engine. And when this was delivered, I was told that it had actually been started and was running by the guy who collected it, which made me think, yay, engine's okay. And when I first got it last night, I managed to actually get it running myself, but only briefly, because when I checked, you'll notice there's no belt there, and what we did have was a completely shredded belt line in the bottom of the engine bay. So quickly turned that off, but it does make me wonder how long it's been running with other people, because Copart showed it running as well. So I've now got a horrible suspicion about the head gaskets, but we'll see. But the reason this pump failed, you can probably see down there the water pump, it's not meant to wobble back and forth. You can't really see it, but that water pump's goosed. There's also coolant on top of the unit there. So I think what's happened is at some point the water pump's gone. It's dumped coolant all over the place. Quite how the suspension got damaged, I don't know, but that's another story. But the first thing I need to do now is therefore make sure everything's okay before I even start this engine again. So I now knew the engine ran, but obviously with that belt I couldn't start it again and I had to be really careful. Luckily I'd only had it running about 20 seconds before I got out the car and went and had a look, and then found the belt wasn't there. So happy enough that there was no damage done then, but there is a real question mark over what's happened previously. But because the engine had been running for long enough, what I did manage to pull was a fault code, and it was, I'll just show it up on the screen now, but it was a correlation error between the cam and the crank on the intake cam on the left bank of the engine. And digging into that, there's three real causes for that. It's either the VVT solenoid that controls the variable timing on that cam, the possibility that the timing chain is stretched and jumped a tooth, and therefore that's allowed the cam to move out of time, which at the mileage this car's done, 183,000, is the most likely culprit. Or there's the possibility that the ECU is faulty, which I think is unlikely. I think I'd have other faults if I had an ECU issue. So one of the first things I've got to do in this car is the engine checks. I'm going to make sure this is actually viable and there's no massive damage or underlying nasties or whatever. So as I've already said, the water pump, job for working at night, the water pump down that way is absolutely knackered, so that needs to be replaced. I know that. What I now need to check is the reason behind the P0018 code, which originates around this sensor here, so we're going to check that. But what I also need to do is check the compression, because this is a higher mileage engine, and make sure there's no scoring in the bores as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is get off this intake to allow me access, and then get all these spark plugs out. I'll then be removing the fuel pump fuse or relay, which will be somewhere in that fuse box there, and getting a compression check done. Right, we're back. I've now got both hands free. The intake manifold is off, a lot easier than the GS, although when you look inside it, it's also a lot dirtier. You can see both from that and inside the runners, there's a lot of crap in there. And bad news, I managed to rip one of the connectors getting it off despite being careful. However, good news, let's get that out of the way. It was the one bit of that entire loom that not only has a small section that is replaceable, but it also had a tag with a part number on it, and it's about 15 quid. So that was a relief, because initially I was thinking that was going to be an absolute pain in the neck and I was going to be soldering wires and doing all sorts of things. But no, the intake's off and off to one side. Joys of doing everything one-handed. And the key thing now is to test the compression, and then also at the same time, because I've got that cam crank fault, I want to test this solenoid here for the VSV for the intake cam, because for all I know that's faulty and that's the issue, which would be really, really nice if it was. Therefore I don't think it will be. So compression test after I've done that, and what I'm looking for is about 200 psi ideally, but at least over 142. This is going to be a cold compression test, so we'll see. But as I've said already, there's a little bit of suspicion about whether there's been any head gasket damage as a result of running without a belt. So this will be very key as to whether or not I'm keeping this engine or whether we're doing something completely different. And the test I've just done is to put an ohmmeter across the two terminals there and looking for around about 6.9 ohms, which was bang on what it was. So electrically it's fine. What I'm now going to do is put a voltage across those terminals and just make sure it's actuating correctly, because it might well be jammed, and dirty oil and other things can cause that. So again, both hands required. Let's see where we go. So what I'm now doing is I've got the positive wired up, and now every time I touch the negative, and as you can see, oops, that solenoid is moving. So there's nothing wrong with that solenoid. The problem lies a bit deeper. So next thing is compression test, as said, and then once I've got that bit of engine health sorted, assuming that's okay, it's going to be timing covers off and start looking at the actual timing of the engine, because potentially the problem now is a stretched chain that's allowed it to jump a tooth and put the timing out, in which case I'll be doing the timing chains on this thing. Right, got all the spark plugs out, and there's a bit of a sideway. They look very black and oily, but that's not a surprise. Compression tester's now in. Admittedly this is cylinder 2, that's 1, so I'm kind of doing them a little bit out of sequence, but the big brother is providing a little bit of battery assistance, and now it's just a case of cranking them over and recording the results. Obviously with the fuel pump and the fuel relay and the fuel pump fuse pulled. So let's see what it says. So as you can see there, we've got low compression on one cylinder and the rest of them sitting at a fairly low but average scores each, with a significant improvement when they're wet, which would suggest that the piston rings are a little bit worn, but if that compression is within the tolerances, then that's fine. And in the next video I'll be looking at getting the timing covers off, the cam covers off. I'll be looking at doing a leak down test, and then what I've got on a slow boat from China, unfortunately, is a decent endoscope with a side camera that'll allow me to look at the bores. So once I've got all those three things done, that'll give me a good engine health state, and until that arrives, the plan is just to continue on smaller cosmetic stuff. The first thing I'll be tackling is the alloys, and also that broken tie rod end and a few other minor suspension issues as well. So I'll probably get them sorted in the meantime, and then as soon as that endoscope arrives, we can diagnose the engine, and from there it's either into rebuild the existing engine, or I'm going to get that engine ready to come out and look to source a decent used low mileage engine. So what I've got at the end of all this is a tired, tatty, cosmetically scruffy car that I think is still viable and still savable. It is going to take time, and the quality is going to be a bit iffy. As you can probably tell, this is a car park at my work, and I'm largely doing it at night outside of normal working hours. So again, apologies in advance for that, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. Certainly this is live, unedited, all issues exposed. There is no trickery here. I may end up with a complete lemon and be massively out of pocket, or I may end up with a decent car. Who knows? You'll have to wait and see. So if you want to see more of this, please consider subscribing. If you liked this video, tatty as it was, then please consider liking down below and comment, tell me what you think. But certainly I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it, and hope you continue watching.